We're all being misled. You think the main battle right now is between Iran, Israel, and the United States? That's the most expensive optical illusion in modern history. While American generals are standing at podiums reporting 99% of targets intercepted, their accountants are staring at spreadsheets in absolute horror. While cruise missiles worth millions of dollars are being fired at targets worth tens of thousands, the real winner of this war is sitting quietly in Beijing, building warships, counting days, and not firing a single shot. By the time official media figures out what actually happened here, it will be too late to explain it to you honestly. So I'm going to do it now, with numbers, with facts, and without the comfortable lies. Let me tell you about a specific moment, March 2026. Somewhere over the Arabian Peninsula, an Iranian Shahed 136 loitering munition, a machine roughly the size of a motorcycle, made of commercial components you could buy online, is cruising at 120 miles per hour toward a military installation. It cost its manufacturer approximately $30,000 to produce. To stop it, an American Patriot PAC-3 missile launches from its battery. The cost of that interceptor? $3,700,000, 125 times the value of the target it's chasing. Now pause on that image for a moment. Not the explosion, not the triumph of the defense system. Sit with the math, because this single transaction, repeated dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of times across the skies of the Middle East, is the mechanism by which the most powerful military in human history is quietly dismantling its own ability to fight the war that actually matters. I've spent a decade studying conflict economics and great power competition. I've watched America's military doctrine evolve from Cold War dominance into something I can only describe as technological arrogance dressed up as strategy. And what I'm watching right now, in real time, is not a victory. It is a slow-motion industrial collapse disguised as a military campaign. Kevin Chen, a strategist at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore, put it plainly. The United States is walking into a conflict with no clear end, and every week it stays, it becomes less prepared for a potential showdown with Beijing. That is not an opinion from the fringes. That is a sober assessment from the mainstream of strategic analysis, and almost no one is saying it loudly enough. So let's say it loudly. Nevatim Air Base, southern Negev Desert, Israel. If you were designing the most valuable piece of military real estate on Earth, you'd build something like Nevatim. Spread across the desert floor are 3 squadrons of F-35I Adir stealth fighters, the 116th, 140th, and 117th. 39 of the most sophisticated combat aircraft ever built, with contracts already signed to expand that fleet to 75 jets by 2028. Each one costs approximately $96 million. 39 aircraft, $3.7 billion sitting on a runway. And that figure doesn't include the hardened shelters, the intelligence targeting centers, the maintenance depots, the newly constructed hangars for KC-46 aerial refueling tankers. Add the infrastructure, and you're looking at a multi-billion-dollar concentration of offensive military power in a single geographic location, a location that Iran's military planners have marked at the very top of their target list. This is not a coincidence. This is the logic of asymmetric warfare. Iran doesn't need to destroy all of Nevatim. It doesn't even need to destroy half of it. It only needs to demonstrate that the shield can be overwhelmed, that somewhere in the barrage of 50, 100, 200 incoming missiles, a few will get through. Because once the F-35I fleet is grounded, even temporarily, Israel loses its primary tool for penetrating Iranian airspace. The offensive edge disappears, and the entire strategic architecture of Western deterrence in the region collapses with it. So how does Israel defend Nevatim? with the best air defense money can buy. The Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric interceptor, developed jointly with Boeing, each unit costing between $2 and $4 million. The Patriot PAC-3 at $3,700,000 per shot. And at the top of the pyramid, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, THAAD, where a single interceptor cost $12,700,000 and a complete battery cost $1 billion to field. Now here's where the mathematics become something almost philosophical. In the 10 days of the initial kinetic exchange between the U.S.-Israeli coalition and Iran in early 2026, American and Israeli forces fired an estimated 133 advanced interceptors to maintain that celebrated 90% interception success rate. The JINSA analysis puts the cost of that 10-day defense at approximately $1.28 billion in interceptors alone. Think about that number against the cost of what was coming at them. Iran's offensive arsenal for this engagement leaned heavily on its Zulfahar short-range ballistic missiles, approximately $150,000 each. Its medium-range Imad missiles, around $250,000. Even its most advanced heavy platforms, like the Khorramshahr 4, come in at estimates around $8 million per unit. The cost-exchange ratio, in the kindest interpretation of the available data, favors the attacker by 48-1. In the harshest interpretation, when you're using a THAAD round at $12 million to intercept a $150,000 Zulfahar, it's 85-1. But here's the detail that keeps senior Pentagon officials awake at night, the detail that never makes the headline beneath the word intercepted. The United States produces between 12 and 18 THAAD interceptors per year. 12 to 18 per year. In the first phase of this conflict, American forces fired 92 THAAD missiles. They burned through between 5 and 7 years of production capacity in a matter of days. The Missile Defense Agency has publicly acknowledged that the procurement shortfall for new THAAD deliveries will not be resolved until April 2027. The factory lines cannot simply be turned up like a faucet. These systems require exotic materials, precision-machined guidance components, solid fuel propulsion systems. Rebuilding inventory takes years, not months. So when the generals report 99% of targets intercepted, they are technically correct. What they are not telling you is the following. The magazine is getting empty. The next Iranian salvo cost Tehran roughly the same as the last one. The next American response cost a production capacity that doesn't exist yet. The attacker can reload faster than the defender can manufacture. This is not a temporary tactical problem. This is a structural flaw in the entire architecture of Western deterrence. And it was visible years before the first missile of this conflict was fired. Every analyst who has studied the economics of saturation warfare saw it coming. The question was never whether the trap would close. The question was only when. And the trap has closed. But the loss of billions of dollars in missiles is almost routine by the standards of American military spending. What was happening simultaneously in the mountains of Western Iran at that exact moment? That is the part of this story that almost no one is discussing, and it changes everything. Here's a fact about Iran that Tehran works very hard to prevent its own citizens from contemplating. Approximately 9 to 10 million Kurds live within Iran's borders. That's roughly 10% of the entire population, concentrated along the western frontier in the provinces of Kurdistan, Kermanshah, West Azerbaijan, and Elam. Kermanshah province alone holds 1 million residents. It consistently ranks among the poorest, most underdeveloped provinces in the country. The Islamic Republic has for decades treated its Kurdish population with a combination of cultural suppression, economic neglect, and periodic military force. What the regime built over those decades was not loyalty. It built a reservoir of grievance. Now look at what sits on the other side of that border. The Zagros Mountain range, 1,600 kilometers of jagged ridges, deep valleys, and choke points, peaks exceeding 3,000 meters, snow, mudslides, terrain that has defeated conventional armies for centuries. During the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, Saddam Hussein sent mechanized divisions into these mountains and watched them bleed out in the passes. The Zagros does not yield to tanks and artillery. It yields to men who know it, and there are men who know it. The Kurdistan Free Life Party, PJAK, fields up to 3,000 battle-hardened fighters. These are not irregulars. Many of them are veterans of the war against ISIS in Syria and Iraq, trained in small unit tactics, experienced in ambush and infiltration across exactly this kind of terrain. The Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran, PDKI, adds another 1,000 to 2,000 fighters with decades of institutional knowledge and cross-border intelligence networks reaching back into the 1940s. The Kurdistan Freedom Party, PAK, fields several hundred personnel, and here is the detail that requires particular attention. PAK fighters were formally trained by U.S. military instructors in 2015 during the anti-ISIS campaign in Kirkuk. American doctrine, American training, Iranian Kurdish hands. Together, across all factions, we're looking at perhaps 6,000 to 8,000 armed fighters operating in terrain specifically designed by geography to amplify their advantages and neutralize the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' conventional superiority. On February 22, 2026, these historically fragmented factions achieved something unprecedented. 5 major armed Kurdish parties formally established the Coalition of Political Forces of Iranian Kurdistan, the CPFIK. Their stated objective is unambiguous: the total overthrow of the Islamic Republic and the establishment of civil governance in whatever power vacuum follows. Now, I want to be very precise here because this is where the story becomes genuinely complicated. Intelligence reports indicate that the CIA is actively working to arm Kurdish forces inside Iran. U.S. President Trump reportedly made a direct phone call to Mustafa Hijri, the leader of the PDKI, signaling a level of strategic coordination that goes well beyond unofficial contact. And in early March 2026, U.S. and Israeli air assets specifically targeted Iranian law enforcement command headquarters in Kurdish cities, Sanandaj, Marivan, facilities that serve as the regime's primary instrument of internal control. Destroy the security apparatus, and the path for Kurdish fighters moving east from the Zagros becomes considerably less obstructed. From a pure tactical standpoint, this is elegant. The IRGC is being forced to divert resources, manpower, and air defense systems away from the Persian Gulf and the Israeli border to secure an interior front that stretches across 1,600 kilometers of mountain terrain. Every battalion deployed to Kermanshah is a battalion not defending a missile battery near Tehran. Every radar system repositioned to cover the Zagros is a gap in the coverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is being forced to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously, and the second front costs its architects almost nothing. But here is where a decade of watching these dynamics forces me to say something uncomfortable. The Kurdish front is also a trap, just a different kind of trap, and one that catches a different set of victims. Sponsoring a Kurdish insurgency, genuinely arming it, committing American intelligence infrastructure to sustaining it, means crossing a threshold from which there is no clean exit. It threatens the territorial integrity of a nation of 90 million people. It virtually ensures that no Iranian government, whatever comes after this one, will be capable of accepting a negotiated settlement without appearing to capitulate to foreign-backed separatism. The political scientist John Mearsheimer, who has studied the logic of American interventionism for decades, notes that regime change in Iran would require the successor government to be permanently aligned with Washington. And in a fractured, post-collapse Iran, that is not a realistic outcome. It is a fantasy. What it produces instead is permanent entanglement. A Kurdish insurgency, once activated, generates its own momentum. It demands supply. It demands intelligence support. It demands diplomatic management of relationships with Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, all of whom have Kurdish populations of their own and their own very different interests in the outcome. It creates the conditions for exactly the kind of nation-building quagmire that consumed American resources in Afghanistan for 20 years. The tactics are sound. The strategy is the problem. And no one in the room appears to be asking the strategic question. Because while everyone's attention is locked on the mountains of western Iran and the skies above Nevatim, an entirely different kind of construction project is underway. Not in the Middle East, not in Europe, on the other side of the planet. And it doesn't require a single missile to be fired. Here is a number that I want you to hold in your mind for the rest of this video. 230. That is the factor by which China's shipbuilding capacity currently exceeds that of the United States. Not 20% more, not twice as large, 230 times larger. The Jiangnan shipyard in Shanghai, a single facility, possesses more shipbuilding capacity than every American shipyard combined. The China State Shipbuilding Corporation, a single state-owned enterprise, built more commercial vessels by tonnage in 2024 than the entire U.S. shipbuilding industry has produced since the end of World War II. China captured 53% of the global commercial shipbuilding market in 2024. The United States share, 0.1%. Not a typo, not a rounding error, 0.1%. And China's military-civil fusion strategy means that every ship produced for commercial clients in those same yards, every tanker, every container vessel, every bulk carrier, is building the organizational capacity, the supply chains, the engineering expertise, and the worker training pipelines that feed directly into PLA and naval expansion. The commercial market is financing the military buildup. The world is paying Beijing to build the fleet that will challenge American naval dominance. While the United States was burning through $12 million THAAD interceptors over the Persian Gulf, China was mass-producing the Type 052D destroyer, a highly capable warship displacing 7,500 tons at a rate of 3.1 ships per year. The American Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the backbone of U.S. naval power, is being produced at 1.6 ships per year. China is outbuilding America in its primary combatant vessel class at nearly a 2-to-1 ratio, and accelerating. The PLAN has already deployed 10 Type 055 super destroyers, 12,000-ton platforms carrying 112 vertical launch cells designed for cooperative engagement and over-the-horizon strike capability. The American equivalent, the Zumwalt-class destroyer, was capped at a production run of 3 ships after catastrophic cost overruns and technical failures. 3 against 10 and counting. But the ships are almost a secondary concern compared to what the PLA rocket force has been quietly deploying. Satellite imagery from 2024 identified 59 DF-26 transporter erector launchers parked at a single facility near Beijing. The DF-26 intermediate-range ballistic missile, range over 4,000 kilometers, capable of carrying conventional or nuclear warheads, specifically engineered to strike moving aircraft carriers, is estimated to be in active service in numbers exceeding 250. These are the systems specifically designed to deny American carriers the ability to operate within effective strike range of the Chinese coast. They are the mechanism by which Beijing intends to make American power projection into the Western Pacific prohibitively costly. And now consider what the United States has done to its own ability to counter them. The BGM-109 Tomahawk cruise missile, the premier American long-range precision strike weapon, the instrument by which the U.S. Navy reaches out and touches targets from standoff distances that keep carrier groups and their crews out of harm's way. In 2025, the United States was producing 72 Tomahawks per year. 72. Each one takes approximately 2 years to manufacture from start to delivery. In 2003, the United States fired 800 Tomahawks in the opening phase of the Iraq War. At 2025 production rates, replacing that single expenditure would take just over 10 years. Now apply that to what's currently burning in the Middle East. During the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury, American naval forces fired an estimated 180 Standard missiles, SM-2, SM-3, and SM-6 variants, along with 90 Patriot rounds and 40 THAAD interceptors. Military analysts calculated that the Tomahawk expenditure in just the first 3 days of high-intensity operations represented roughly 10% of the Navy's entire ready-to-fire inventory. 3 days of combat in the Middle East consumed 5 years of American cruise missile production. 5 years. If China moves against Taiwan tomorrow, and I am not predicting it will, I am simply following the logic of the resource calculus, the U.S. Navy would arrive to that theater with racks that have already been partially emptied in the Arabian Peninsula. The standoff strike capability that is absolutely fundamental to the American way of war in a contested anti-access environment would be degraded before the first shot was fired in the Pacific. And the financial dimension compounds this. Maintaining 2 U.S. carrier strike groups in the Middle East, the USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln, costs approximately $13 million every single day. Not the munitions, not the airstrikes, just the fuel, the personnel, the supplies, the maintenance, and the depreciation of operating those groups on station. $13 million a day equates to nearly $400 million a month. During the peak of the 2025-2026 Middle East crisis, those 2 deployed carrier groups absorbed 41% of all U.S. Navy global carrier steaming days. 41% of America's naval presence consumed in one theater, the wrong theater. John Mearsheimer, the University of Chicago political scientist who has spent a career